Welcome to our beautiful church here of the Sacred Heart of Mary on Wolf Island. We're here for the Feast of the Epiphany. The Epiphany falls that 12th day after Christmas, another part of how we might measure the Christmas season, traditionally celebrated on the 6th of January. This year, we celebrate on the 3rd of January, the nearest Sunday. Now, the Epiphany marks the coming of the Magi, the wise men, the three kings, whatever we want to call them, that Matthew tells us come from the east. They have seen the star that rose upon the birth of the King of the Jews, and they come to pay him homage. In our nativity scene, if you've been paying attention in the previous videos, you didn't see the Magi there or the camel. Here we have one of them arrived. His friends are behind a little bit outside of the frame of the shot, and the camel there joining the shepherds and so forth. What's the significance of the Magi? Well, there are a couple of important points we might consider. One is that they are not Jews. They are Gentiles of the nations from quite a distance. And the whole history of salvation up until this point had taken place within the children of Israel, the calling of Abraham, the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Moses coming to set my people free from Pharaoh in Egypt, the story of King David and King Solomon, the prophecies of Isaiah that one day someone will rise from the house of David. So perhaps the question is maybe the Messiah is just for the chosen people. Well, the coming of the Magi from the east, from foreign lands, from the gentiles, the people, the nations, reminds us that Jesus Christ, his coming is for all nations. He came from a particular people, the chosen people, the Jewish people, but he is for all nations. And so for us who are Gentiles, it marks an important day, the manifestation or epiphany of the Lord Jesus to the nations. And in fact, in some Christian cultures, the Epiphany is celebrated with as equal or even greater solemnity than Christmas itself. Another thing we might consider about the wise men from the east is that they were wise. They were men of learning. They were men of science. They knew how to read the signs in the heavens. Today we hear a lot about following the science. In almost any public policy debate, one side says, follow the science. Well, the Magi are a good reminder to us that if we follow the science, eventually, sooner or later, we end up with God, the creator of all things, who imbued all things with their own laws, with their own internal order. To be a scientist is not to be against God. To follow the science means we eventually come back to God. Without God, without his order, without his intellect, without his creative design, science would be very difficult indeed. In fact, without his creation, what would we even have to study? But more broadly, the Magi teach us that when we study God's creation, when we know it really well, we grow in appreciation, in wonder, in awe, and eventually in worship for the God who created it all. These wise men were not so arrogant as not to kneel before the Lord Jesus. They didn't honor creation to the point of neglecting its creator. Here we see one of them here kneeling before the Lord Jesus, an attitude of humility and worship fitting for all, including the learned, including the wise, including those men of science. This year, 2021, we mark the 700th anniversary of the death of the great Italian poet Dante. Last year, 2020, we marked the 700th anniversary of his most famous work, the Divine Comedy. Perhaps the greatest work of literature in any language, full of philosophical and theological depth. The Divine Comedy is divided into three parts: the Inferno, the Purgatorio, and the Paradiso. The most famous part is the first, the Inferno, and at the end of that poem, that part of the poem, Dante speaks about God as the love that moves the sun and the other stars. It's a beautiful description of God, love eternal, not a distant force, not an impersonal mover, not a blind watchmaker, but rather an eternal love that's creative, that puts, as it were, all creation in its place, the love that moves the sun and the other stars. We behold now in this nativity scene that love made incarnate, that infant child who is the one who moves the sun, moves the stars, before whom the wise and the learned are not afraid to bow down in worship. It gives us great comfort to know that this vastness around us, the vastness of the universe, is not empty, but in fact filled with the love of God. On this Epiphany, then, we ask the wise and the learned to teach us to look up, to see the stars, but to look beyond them. For it's not the stars that illumine and look down on the child Jesus, but rather the stars themselves that are illumined by that divine love now incarnate in the manger of Bethlehem. God bless you.